Welcome to Adriana Stories. The Coral Secret, a tale of depths and deceptions. As the first light of dawn gently caresses the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pale pink and soft lavender that gradually bleed into the deep blue of the approaching day, I find myself sitting on the weathered wooden pier of our modest coastal home in Palawan, Philippines. The gentle lapping of the turquoise waters against the barnacle-encrusted posts creates a rhythmic melody that has, over the years, become the soundtrack to my reflections. The salty breeze carries with it the faint scent of seaweed and the distant cries of seabirds beginning their morning hunt. It's in this quiet moment, with the world still half asleep and the ocean breathing its slow, ancient breaths, that I've finally gathered the courage to recount this story. Not because the pain has faded, but precisely because it remains so vivid, so immediate, even after 12 long years beneath these tropical skies. You see, dear listener, this isn't merely a tale of betrayal in the conventional sense, though betrayal certainly plays its part. Nor is it a simple story about love lost or trust broken, though those elements are present as well. No, this is something far more complex, more layered, like the intricate ecosystem of the coral reefs I've spent my life studying. It's a story about what lies beneath the surface, about how the most beautiful structures can conceal the darkest secrets, and about how sometimes the deepest deceptions are born not from malice but from necessity. A story that, I must confess, has taken me more than a decade to fully understand, let alone articulate. My name is Daniel, and until 12 years ago, I was a marine biologist working with the Marine Research Institute of the Philippines, specializing in coral reef restoration. My wife, Elena, was a policy advisor for the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, working to protect our fragile marine ecosystems from the ever-encroaching threats of overfishing, pollution, and climate change. We met during graduate studies at the University of the Philippines, bonded by our shared passion for the ocean and our commitment to preserving its wonders. Our love story, in many ways, seemed as natural and inevitable as the tides themselves. For 8 years, our life together was, by all appearances, idyllic. We lived in a small but comfortable house on the outskirts of El Nido, where the jungle meets the sea in a breathtaking display of natural splendor. Our days were filled with the work we loved. Mine among the vibrant coral gardens beneath the waves, hers in the conference rooms and government offices above them. Evenings were spent on our porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, discussing our days, planning conservation initiatives, dreaming of expanding our efforts to protect more of the reef systems that surrounded us like a living jewel box. I should have noticed the changes earlier, of course. But hindsight, as they say, is always 20/20, while the present is often shrouded in the fog of routine and trust. It began subtly, so subtly that at first I dismissed them as mere figments of an overactive imagination. Elena started working later hours, citing urgent policy meetings that seemed to multiply during the rainy season. Her phone, which she had always left casually on the kitchen counter, now remained firmly in her pocket, the screen facing down. She began traveling more frequently to Manila, claiming these trips were necessary for high-level negotiations with international conservation organizations. At first, I admired her dedication. After all, who was I to question her commitment to our shared cause? But then came the small inconsistencies, the meetings that didn't align with the government calendar, the phone calls she'd take in another room, the way she'd sometimes pause mid-sentence as if catching herself before revealing something she shouldn't. There was the time she claimed to be meeting with officials from the World Wildlife Fund, only for me to discover later that no WWF representatives had been in the country that week. Or the occasion when she left for Manila on a Tuesday, insisting it was for a 3-day conference, yet returned on Thursday looking as though she hadn't slept, her eyes red-rimmed and distant. I remember one particularly humid evening in June, sitting at our dining table with maps of the reef system spread before us, when she received a text message. The phone vibrated with that distinctive double chime she'd set for certain contacts. Contacts I now realize were few in number but significant in nature. Without thinking, I glanced up just as she quickly turned the screen face down, her hand trembling slightly as she did so. "Government business," she murmured, avoiding my gaze as she pushed back from the table. "I need to take this outside." The ocean was unusually calm that night, the surface like liquid mercury reflecting the pale moon above. From where I sat, I could see her silhouette against the fading light, hear the low murmur of her voice carried on the breeze. Something in her posture, the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing over her shoulder as if checking for eavesdroppers, set my instincts on edge. Not the instincts of a suspicious husband, but those of a scientist trained to observe anomalies in natural systems. Something was off-kilter in our domestic ecosystem, and I, perhaps foolishly, decided to investigate. Now, before you imagine some dramatic scene of me rummaging through her belongings or hiring a private investigator, let me assure you that my approach was far more methodical, far more scientific. After all, I was a researcher, not a detective. I began by noting patterns when she traveled, who she met with, what projects she seemed particularly invested in. I cross-referenced her claimed activities with official government schedules and conservation organization calendars. I paid attention to the subtle shifts in her mood, the changes in her routine, the way she'd sometimes stare into the middle distance as if rehearsing lines for a performance only she could see. It was during one of my routine coral sampling expeditions in the Baquit Bay area that I stumbled upon the first concrete evidence. Though at the time I didn't recognize it as such, I was collecting water samples near a particularly vibrant section of reef when I noticed something unusual. A small, almost imperceptible discoloration in the coral that didn't match any known pattern of bleaching or disease. It was as if someone had carefully, deliberately introduced a foreign substance into the ecosystem. Curious, I took a sample back to my lab for analysis. What I discovered there would change everything. The coral tissue contained trace amounts of a chemical compound I'd never encountered before, a sophisticated blend of polymers that, upon further examination, appeared to be designed to temporarily alter the coral's fluorescence patterns. Why would anyone want to do such a thing? My scientific curiosity piqued. I began researching similar cases and discovered that this compound had been used in only one other documented instance, by a group of illegal fishermen who were attempting to mask the locations of particularly valuable coral formations from conservation authorities and government inspectors. Suddenly, the pieces began to fall into place with terrifying clarity. Elena's late-night meetings, her unexplained trips, her sudden interest in certain protected areas, all of it pointed toward one horrifying conclusion. My wife, the woman I'd shared my life with for 8 years, the woman who had stood beside me at conferences advocating for stricter protections for our reefs, was somehow involved with those who sought to exploit them. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined, not just because of the personal deception, but because of what it represented. We had built our lives around the belief that these fragile ecosystems needed protection, that our work mattered, that we were making a difference. And now it seemed that the person closest to me had been working against everything we claimed to stand for. For days, I walked through our home like a ghost, observing Elena with the clinical detachment of a researcher studying an unfamiliar species. I watched as she prepared breakfast, as she kissed me goodbye in the morning, as she sat at her computer working late into the night. Each gesture, once familiar and comforting, now seemed like a carefully constructed performance. How long had this been going on? Who was she working with? What exactly was she doing? The questions swirled in my mind like debris caught in a strong current, impossible to grasp or contain. And yet, despite the pain and the anger that threatened to consume me, I found myself hesitating to confront her. There was something about the situation that didn't quite add up, some subtle dissonance beneath the surface of what I'd discovered. Elena had never shown any interest in money or material gain. Our life together had been deliberately simple, focused on our work rather than accumulation of wealth. The Elena I knew wouldn't betray our principles for personal gain, which meant there had to be another explanation, however improbable it might seem. One rainy afternoon, while Elena was away on another urgent trip to Manila, I found myself drawn to her study, a room she had always kept meticulously organized and, in recent months, increasingly off-limits. With a mixture of guilt and determination, I began to search through her files, not as an angry husband seeking evidence of betrayal, but as a scientist gathering data to test a hypothesis. What I discovered there would turn my understanding of everything upside down. Among her official government documents and conservation reports, I found a series of encrypted files on her laptop. Files that, through a combination of password guessing, using dates significant to us, and some basic hacking skills I'd picked up over the years, I managed to access. What I found inside wasn't evidence of corruption, but something far more dangerous. Detailed reports on illegal fishing operations, maps showing the locations of protected coral systems being targeted, and communications with someone using the codename Guardian. As I read through the documents, a different narrative began to emerge, one in which Elena wasn't the betrayer but the betrayed. It appeared she had been working undercover for the National Bureau of Investigation, infiltrating a powerful syndicate that was systematically destroying our marine ecosystems for profit. The encrypted communications revealed that she had been gathering evidence for over 2 years, risking her life to document the operations of a criminal organization that had already silenced several whistleblowers. The realization hit me like a rogue wave, knocking the breath from my lungs and leaving me reeling. All those late nights, those mysterious trips, the guarded phone calls, they weren't signs of her betrayal, but evidence of her commitment to a cause far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. She had been protecting me by keeping me in the dark, knowing that if I appeared suspicious or concerned, it might compromise her cover and put us both in danger. The emotional whiplash was almost too much to bear. One moment, I was the betrayed husband, nursing a wound that felt like it might never heal. The next, I was the unwitting civilian who had nearly exposed an ongoing sting operation that could have cost my wife her life. The complexity of it all, the layers of deception, the necessary lies, the emotional toll of living a double life, suddenly made sense in a way that simple betrayal never could. But understanding didn't bring relief. If anything, it created a new set of problems. Now that I knew the truth, I was in danger too. The syndicate Elena was investigating had eyes everywhere. Corrupt officials, compromised law enforcement officers, even members of the very conservation organizations we trusted. If they discovered that I knew about Elena's undercover work, they would come for both of us. I had a choice to make: confront Elena and risk compromising her mission, or continue playing the oblivious husband while silently supporting her from the shadows. It was the most difficult decision of my life, not because I doubted where my loyalties lay, but because I had to suppress every instinct to protect the person I loved by revealing that I knew the truth. The next few months were an exercise in emotional gymnastics. I had to maintain the facade of a husband, unaware of his wife's secret life, while simultaneously finding ways to support her mission without raising suspicion. I began using my scientific expertise to gather additional evidence: water samples showing illegal chemical dumping, photographic documentation of suspicious vessels near protected areas, that I could discreetly pass along through channels Elena had established. I learned to read the subtle cues that told me when she was particularly stressed or in danger, and how to respond without drawing attention to our communication. One particularly tense evening in October, Elena returned home looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen her. Her hands were trembling, and there was a fresh bruise on her cheekbone that she tried to hide with makeup. Without speaking, she walked to our bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. I sat beside her, placing a hand on her back in what I hoped was a comforting but not suspicious gesture. "They're moving up the timeline," she whispered after a long silence, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rain against our window. "They've accelerated their operations. If we don't act soon—" She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. I understood immediately what she meant. The syndicate was preparing to hit several major coral systems simultaneously, causing damage that would take decades to repair. Elena's operation was at a critical juncture. She needed to make her move soon, but doing so prematurely could mean losing the evidence needed to bring down the entire organization. That night, as Elena slept fitfully beside me, I made a decision. I would use my position and my expertise to create a diversion, a scientific discovery that would draw attention to a specific area of reef, triggering an official investigation that would force the syndicate to reveal their hand. It was risky. If my plan failed, it could compromise Elena's cover and put her in immediate danger. But if it succeeded, It might give her the evidence she needed to bring the entire operation down. The next morning, I contacted Dr. Hernandez at the Marine Research Institute, claiming to have discovered an unprecedented coral bleaching event in a specific area of Baquit Bay. Using my reputation as a careful, conservative scientist, I emphasized the urgency of the situation without raising suspicion. Within hours, a team was assembled to investigate what I knew wasn't actually happening. A carefully constructed fiction designed to draw the syndicate's attention and, hopefully, trigger their response. The plan worked almost too well. 2 days later, as the research team documented the bleaching event, which I had simulated using temporary, non-harmful dyes, a series of suspicious vessels appeared on the horizon. Exactly the kind of activity Elena had been tracking. Unbeknownst to me, she had arranged for a Coast Guard vessel to be coincidentally patrolling the area that day. What followed was a tense confrontation that resulted in the seizure of illegal fishing equipment and the arrest of several key operatives in the syndicate. In the weeks that followed, the operation unraveled rapidly. With critical evidence now in hand, law enforcement moved swiftly, making additional arrests and seizing documents that revealed the full scope of the criminal enterprise. The leader of the syndicate, a wealthy businessman who had previously been honored for his contributions to marine conservation, was arrested at his Manila mansion, his double life exposed for all to see. Elena's cover was finally blown, but the mission had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. The syndicate was dismantled, protected areas were reinforced with new security measures, and several corrupt officials were removed from their positions. For her bravery and dedication, Elena was awarded the Presidential Medal of Merit, the highest civilian honor in the Philippines. And me? I remained quietly in the background, my role in the operation known only to a handful of people. Elena and I never spoke directly about those difficult months, about the pain of my initial misunderstanding or the fear of those dangerous days. Some wounds, like certain types of coral, heal best when left undisturbed, allowed to regenerate in their own time. Today, as I sit on this pier watching the sun rise over the very reefs we fought to protect, I understand something I didn't back then. Betrayal and loyalty are not always as clear-cut as we'd like to believe. Sometimes the deepest betrayals are committed in service of a greater loyalty. Sometimes the most painful deceptions are necessary to protect what matters most. And sometimes the person who appears to have abandoned your shared principles is actually fighting for them in ways you cannot yet comprehend. The ocean teaches us that nothing exists in isolation, that every organism, no matter how small, is connected to the larger ecosystem. Our relationships are much the same. Trust, once broken, doesn't simply vanish. It transforms, adapts, finds new pathways through the damaged terrain. Like coral recovering from bleaching, it may never return to exactly what it was before, but with time and care it can become something equally strong, equally beautiful, perhaps even more resilient for having weathered the storm. Elena and I are no longer married. That chapter of our lives closed when she was offered a position with Interpol's Environmental Crimes Division in Geneva. But we remain connected by something deeper than marriage. A shared understanding of the complex dance between truth and deception, between personal pain and greater purpose. Sometimes, when the wind carries just right, I imagine I can feel her presence in the rhythm of the waves, in the dance of the sunlight on the water's surface. So, dear listener, if you find yourself facing what seems like an unambiguous betrayal, I ask you to consider the possibility that there may be depths you cannot yet see. Not as an excuse for genuine wrongdoing, but as a reminder that human motivations are rarely as simple as they appear on the surface. The most profound truths are often hidden beneath layers of necessary deception, waiting for the right conditions to reveal themselves. And now, as the morning light fully illuminates the waters before me, casting diamonds across the surface of the sea, I leave you with this final thought. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is not confronting the truth head-on, but having the patience to wait for it to reveal itself in its own time. Like the slow, steady growth of coral that eventually forms an entire ecosystem. The choice, as it has always been, remains ours. And sometimes the most powerful response isn't a word at all, but the quiet strength of understanding that grows in the spaces between what is said and what is left unsaid.